I was broke when I found the posting. Not the kind of broke where you skip a coffee or put off buying new shoes. I mean broke to the marrow, the kind that makes you feel like your ribs are caving inward, like you're folding up around the hollow space where your wallet should be. I'd sold my car for rent 3 months ago. I'd been living off instant noodles, odd jobs, and the patience of a landlord who had finally run out of both patience and excuses. When I saw the paper tacked crooked on the bulletin board at a half-deserted gas station, I almost didn't bother reading it. Trail maintenance worker wanted, immediate start, housing provided, apply at Rangers Station in Tallow Creek. Tallow Creek wasn't on any map I remembered. The paper was yellowed around the edges. The ink faded as though it had been hanging there far longer than it should have. But housing provided, that was enough to push me past hesitation. The bus that dropped me off didn't go all the way. It stopped 3 miles outside of town at a rusted sign swallowed by ivy. The paint so chipped I only recognized the letters by running my fingers over them. Tallow Creek. The driver, a man who hadn't said a word in 2 hours, didn't look at me when I asked if this was the stop. He just nodded, eyes fixed ahead, jaw stiff. The road wound through the trees, cracked pavement giving way to gravel, then to dirt. The smell hit first, pine sharpness, sap heavy and sweet, undercut by the damp musk of earth that had soaked in too much rain. It should have been pleasant, but it wasn't. Something about it was thick, oppressive, like the forest wanted me to notice how old it was. The town appeared suddenly, like the trees had pulled apart to let it breathe. Tallow Creek wasn't a town so much as a cluster of old buildings arranged around a square that looked like it hadn't seen a celebration in decades. The storefronts were faded, some boarded up, some with signs hanging crooked on rusted nails. A diner still flickered with a neon open sign, though the O was burnt out, and a general store leaned precariously to one side. People stared. They didn't wave. They didn't nod. They just watched, with expressions that felt more like warnings than curiosity. A woman smoking on a stoop tapped her ash 3 times against her boot when I passed, eyes never leaving me. A pair of boys riding bikes stopped mid-pedal and didn't move until I turned the corner. The ranger station sat at the far edge of town, squatting at the tree line as though it was built to hold back the forest. The building was log and stone, sturdy but weathered, the windows dark. When I stepped inside, it smelled of old paper, smoke, and something damp that clung to the floorboards. He was waiting for me behind the desk. The ranger, though later I would learn people just called him Old Ray, looked like he'd been carved from the same wood that made up the station. Tall, shoulders like rough-hewn beams, beard streaked with gray, skin weathered and lined. His eyes, though, that was what froze me. They weren't just tired, they were haunted, as if he'd seen too much but couldn't stop replaying it. "You're here for the job," he said. "Not a question." I nodded. "Trail maintenance, right?" I saw the posting. He studied me for a long moment, then pulled open a drawer and set a folded sheet of paper on the desk. His hand lingered on it, thick fingers scarred, nails yellowed. "With age and dirt, you'll clear brush, mark paths, keep the trails open. It's work that needs doing, but the work isn't the hard part." He pushed the paper toward me. "Read it." I unfolded it. The paper was creased and stained, the ink handwritten in sharp, deliberate strokes. At the top, in block letters, "Rules for trail crew." My throat went dry as I scanned the list. Never step where the moss is fresh. Do not speak to voices after sundown. If you hear whistling, do not whistle back. Burn broken tools immediately. Never. Stray off trail after dusk. Carry salt in your pocket. Always. If you see the red lantern, turn and walk the other way. I let out a nervous laugh, expecting his expression to soften, expecting him to grin and admit it was just some local superstition, a scare tactic for newcomers, but he didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just kept watching me, eyes steady and heavy as stone. "You think this is a joke?" he asked. "No. I mean, it's unusual. Are these like safety guidelines?" He leaned forward, the old wood of the desk creaking under his weight. "These are rules. Break one and you'll pay for it." Maybe not that night, maybe not in a way you'll see coming, but you will pay. Every man who's ever worked these trails learned that lesson. Some didn't live long enough to pass it on. The way he said it, flat, steady, without an ounce of exaggeration, sent a prickle down my spine. Do you understand? I nodded before I realized I had. He sat back, satisfied enough, and scribbled something on a clipboard. You start tomorrow. Cabin's out back. You'll meet the others there. Don't be late. And don't. His voice trailed off, but his eyes flicked toward the window, toward the trees pressing in. Don't wander tonight. I stepped outside with the paper still in my hand, the rules already smudged from my sweat. The sun was setting behind the peaks, and shadows stretched long across the square. The townspeople were gone now, vanished into homes with curtains drawn, leaving the street empty except for the wind and the faint smell of wood smoke. When I reached the cabin, I caught my reflection in the window glass before I stepped inside. My own face looked strange, hollowed by the dim light, pale against the dark trees behind me. For a moment I could have sworn the reflection wasn't moving in time with me. I shook it off and went inside. The cabin smelled of pine and damp earth, the floor creaking beneath my boots. Tomorrow I'd start work. Tomorrow I'd learn what it really meant to follow rules written by a man with haunted eyes. That night, I lay awake with the rules beside my bed, reading them again and again until I could hear the words in my head even with my eyes closed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something worse than hunger or desperation. I felt fear. I didn't sleep much that first night in the cabin. Every creak of the timbers felt magnified. Every sigh of wind outside the window sounded like it was leaning in to listen. By morning, I had the rules practically memorized. I hadn't even tried, it was just that my eyes kept tracing them over and over until the words had burned themselves into me. The paper sat on the small wooden table beside my bedroll, its edges curled like old bark. My hands shook slightly as I picked it up again, reading it by the thin gray light pushing in through the cracks of the shutters. It felt different this time, less like a list of instructions and more like something sacred, like a ritual I was supposed to recite. Rule 1. Never step where the moss is fresh. It was the first line, the boldest one, and the one my eyes always went back to. The ink was darker there, as though whoever had written it pressed harder, the tip of the pen nearly breaking the paper. I pictured Ray, the old ranger, sitting at this same table years ago, writing it down, maybe remembering what happened, to someone who didn't obey. The thought made my stomach churn. Rule 2. Do not speak to voices after sundown. That one was strange, stranger even than the moss rule. My first thought was, voices? Whose voices? Locals wandering too close to camp? The other workers? Or was it something else entirely? The phrasing stuck with me after sundown, as though there was a shift when the sun dropped, when voices became something more dangerous than conversation. Rule 3. If you hear whistling, do not whistle back. I felt a chill as I read it. It was so specific, so oddly personal, like it was tailored to catch you in a moment of reflex. I imagined being out on a dark trail, someone whistling behind me and the instinct to answer just to prove I wasn't alone. My mouth went dry thinking about it. Rule 4. Burn broken tools immediately. This one was practical, at least on the surface. Broken tools on a job could be dangerous. But burn them? Why not just throw them out? Why the urgency, immediately? The word pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. Rule 5. Never stray off trail after dusk. That was one I could understand. Forests are dangerous at night, full of pits, cliffs, and predators. Still, the weight of it felt heavier than common sense. Rule 6. Carry salt in your pocket, always. I actually laughed when I got to that one, though the sound came out thin and nervous. Salt in my pocket? For what? Seasoning? I knew salt had roots in folklore, wards against spirits, protection rituals. I didn't want to believe that's what Ray intended, but I couldn't shake the thought that he did. Rule 7. If you see the red lantern, turn and walk the other way. That was the one that made me fold the paper shut. Something about it crawled under my skin. I didn't like the way it was worded, if you see. Not if someone carries, not if there's light ahead. Just if you see. As though the red lantern wasn't attached to anything at all. I sat there a long time holding the folded paper in my hands. Outside, I could hear the forest waking up, branches creaking, the distant call of crows, the low sigh of wind dragging through pines. It didn't sound like morning. It sounded like something alive, stretching and testing itself after a long night. When I finally opened the door, the air slapped me with dampness. The trees loomed tall and close, their trunks dark with dew, their branches clawing at the sky. The moss clinging to their roots was thick, rich green, soft-looking enough to lie down on. And yet I caught myself stepping carefully, eyes darting, to the ground as though I could tell fresh moss from the rest. I had no idea what counted as fresh, and that ignorance felt like a trap already waiting for me. I slipped the rules into my pocket. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it was dragging at me with every step. Back in town, the square was empty, as if everyone had melted away with the night. Curtains hung half open in windows, but if there were eyes behind them, they didn't show themselves. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly even though the morning light made it pointless. I thought of the rules again. They weren't written for me alone, they were written for everyone who had come before, which meant others had stood in the same place, paper in their pocket, wondering the same things. How many of them were still around? How many had stepped where the moss was fresh, or spoken to voices, or seen the red lantern? By the time I made it back to the cabin, the others were stirring. A young man with a bandana tied around his head was chopping kindling outside, the blade of his axe flashing with each swing. A girl about my age, hair tied back in a messy braid, leaned against the doorway smoking. She looked at me like she already knew I'd been staring at the rules. "You read them," she said flatly, blowing smoke out the side of her mouth. "Yeah," I said. "Ray gave them to me." Her expression flickered, something hard in her eyes. "He gives them to everyone. Do people actually follow them?" She didn't answer right away, just tapped ash off her cigarette, watching the forest beyond the clearing. The trees shifted with the breeze, though I swore I didn't feel any air on my skin. "You'll follow them," she said at last. Not a suggestion, a fact. I wanted to ask more, to press for details, but something in her tone made me stop. Instead, I reached into my pocket, feeling the crumpled weight of the paper there. The words burned in the back of my skull. "Never step. Where the moss is fresh. Do not speak to voices after sundown. Do not whistle back. Burn broken tools. Stay on trail. Carry salt. Avoid the red lantern." The forest pressed close around us, listening, waiting. And though it was just morning, just another day, I couldn't shake the sense that I had already crossed into something old and patient, something that wanted me to know the rules, not so I would survive, but so I would understand exactly why. I didn't. The first day on the trail should have felt like any other job. Tools in hand, sweat on my back, the smell of sawdust and earth. But there was something off from the beginning. Something in the way the forest seemed to breathe around us. There were 4 of us in total, not counting Ray. Me, Jenny, the girl with the braid who had spoken to me that morning, Marcus, the bandana-wearing guy with the axe, and a younger kid named Tom, who looked like he hadn't yet figured out whether this was a summer gig or a punishment. Jenny was clearly the veteran. Marcus was built for labor, solid and grinning, his shoulders broad enough to carry whole trunks. Tom was quiet, twitchy, eyes darting to the trees more than the work in front of him. Ray gathered us at the edge of the main trail. A massive log sprawled across the dirt where last week's storm had brought it down. His voice was gravel when he spoke, carrying in a way that felt unnecessary in the quiet. "You clear, you mark, you keep the trails clean. That's the job. But the rules..." He tapped the paper in his pocket, the same one he'd given me, "are what keep you alive. You follow them. Always." He left after that, striding back toward the cabin, leaving us alone with the trees. I remember thinking it was strange, how easily he turned his back on the work, but later I realized the trails weren't his responsibility anymore. We were. We started clearing the log. The sound of Marcus's axe bit deep into the wood, each swing echoing down the trail, sharp and rhythmic. Jenny took a saw to the smaller branches, her movements efficient, almost practiced. Tom gathered debris into piles, keeping his distance from the larger work. I hacked away at stubborn brush, sweat dripping into my eyes. For a while it almost felt normal. The air was cool in the morning, sunlight speckled through the canopy, and the smell of pine resin hung thick. But then little things began to gnaw at me. First was the sound. The forest was too quiet. Aside from our tools, there was nothing. No bird calls, no rustle of squirrels, no insects buzzing in the shafts of light. When the axe stopped swinging, the silence pressed so heavily that it felt like my own heartbeat was too loud. Then came the moss. I noticed it when I set my pack down, by a stump. The roots were covered in moss, dark green and damp, spreading wide. But when I turned back 5 minutes later, it looked thicker. Fresh, almost glistening. I blinked hard, telling myself I was imagining it. And yet when I touched it, my fingers came away wet as though it had just rained. That was when Jenny's voice cut in. "Don't linger on it." I pulled my hand back, startled. "What?" "The moss," she said, sawing through a branch without looking up. "Don't look too long. Don't think too much about it." Her words made the back of my neck prickle. "Why not?" "Because the forest listens, and if it knows what you're curious about." She glanced at me then, eyes sharp. "It'll give you more of it." She went back to work before I could ask anything else. By noon, the trail was clearer, though it felt like we'd been working for days. I wiped sweat from my forehead, staring down the newly cut path. It seemed to stretch, unnaturally far, like the forest was swallowing it as fast as we carved it. When I went to grab my pack again, it was gone. At first I thought maybe Marcus had moved it, but when I asked, he shrugged. "Didn't touch it." Tom shook his head quickly, looking as confused as I was. Jenny just frowned, gaze sweeping the tree line. "Sometimes it takes things," she said softly. "What does?" She didn't answer. She just turned back to the trail, sawing faster, her braid whipping against her back with each pull. We found the pack an hour later, sitting neatly in the center of the trail 30 yards behind us. Everything inside was untouched, except the folded paper with the rules. That was damp now, the ink slightly blurred as though it had been dipped in water. The day dragged on like that. Tools went missing, only to turn up in strange places. My saw disappeared, then reappeared wedged high in a branch I hadn't climbed. Marcus's axe slid from his grip and vanished into the undergrowth. When he retrieved it, the handle was slick, with something dark that smelled faintly of iron. The whispers began in the late afternoon. At first I thought it was just the wind carrying fragments of our voices, but then I realized the cadence was wrong. The whispers weren't in time with anything we said. They repeated fragments, twisted them, overlapped until it sounded like a dozen mouths were murmuring in the leaves. "Clear the trail. Clear the trail. Clear them, clear." I froze, the saw halfway through a branch. "Did you hear that?" Marcus grunted. "Hear what?" Jenny dropped her saw and stood, eyes narrowing. She turned toward the trees, her whole body tense. "Don't ask out loud," she hissed. Tom dropped his pile of branches with a clatter. "Why not?" Jenny's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "Because if you ask, it answers." We worked faster after that, each of us desperate to finish the stretch and get back to camp. The air grew heavier, thicker, as though the forest was leaning down on us. By the time we packed up, I could taste the damp rot in the back of my throat. As we walked back, I glanced over my shoulder. The moss was everywhere now, on stumps, on rocks, even creeping up the bases of trees where I swore I hadn't seen it that morning. And maybe it was the angle of the setting sun, but I could have sworn it was glistening again, like it was breathing. That night, I sat in my cabin staring at the rules by lamplight. Jenny's words echoed in my skull. Don't question the forest out loud. I traced my finger over the first rule. Never step where the moss is fresh. And for the first time I realized the question that had been growing since morning. How, exactly, do you tell when moss is fresh? The lamp sputtered then, shadows jerking across the walls. And for a moment, I thought I heard my own voice, low and muffled, whispering back at me from outside the window. The forest doesn't give second chances. I didn't believe that on the second morning. Not yet. I still thought maybe the rules were exaggerated, maybe meant to scare us into caution. By the end of that day, I knew better. It was Tom who broke it. Tom, the youngest of us, the one who kept glancing nervously over his shoulder like he expected the trees to lean down and swallow him whole. He was clumsy with the work, more a liability than a help, and Marcus had been riding him hard since morning. Keep up, kid. You're dragging ass, Marcus barked, swinging his axe with easy rhythm. Chips of wood flew, sunlight glinting off the blade. Tom muttered something under his breath, clutching his own smaller axe. His eyes darted everywhere but the path, at the shadows, the moss, even at the sky, as if hoping for an excuse to leave. We were cutting a section where the trail narrowed between two huge trunks, their roots twisted like sleeping snakes. The ground was uneven, littered with stones and tufts of moss that clung to everything. That's when it happened. I saw him step. At first, I didn't notice what was wrong. His boot pressed down on a patch of moss near the base of a root and, for a heartbeat, it was just that, green against leather. But then it pulsed. I swear it. Like a living thing. Like the moss inhaled the moment his weight sank into it. The green brightened, dew bursting across the surface as if it had just been born fresh. Tom, I shouted. He looked up, confused, his foot still planted. Jenny's saw clattered to the dirt, her face drained of color. Move, she screamed. Tom jerked back, stumbling, but it was too late. His boot print remained, pressed into the moss as though the ground had memorized him. Nothing happened immediately. That was almost worse. He laughed nervously, brushing dirt off his pants. What? I didn't do anything, but Jenny was already backing away, shaking her head. You stepped where it's fresh. You stepped where it's fresh, she whispered, it like a prayer, or maybe a curse. We tried to keep working, but nobody had their rhythm anymore. Every crack of Marcus's axe sounded like it split the silence wide open. Tom kept glancing at his foot, muttering that it was fine, that nothing was wrong. By dusk, we headed back to camp, and that was when things changed. Tom didn't speak during dinner. He sat on his bedroll, staring at the fire with eyes too wide, too glassy. When I tried to hand him a plate of beans, he didn't move. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Kid? Marcus asked. His voice was uneasy for the first time since I'd met him. You good? Tom blinked. Slowly, he turned his head toward us. His mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile, but it was wrong, like he was imitating one without remembering how it worked. That's when I saw his hands. Green stained his fingertips, faint at first, then darker as the firelight, hit tiny threads, almost like veins, crawled beneath the skin of his nails. Moss. My stomach dropped. Jenny cursed and stood, knocking over her tin cup. We can't stay near him. What the hell are you talking about? Marcus snapped. He just looks sick. Look at him, she shouted. We did. Tom's boots were damp, though the ground was dry. Moisture seeped from the seams, darkening the leather. And as he shifted, I swore I saw something green pushing out between the laces like shoots searching for sunlight. The smell hit next. Wet earth, rotting leaves, thick and cloying. The kind of smell you notice after rain when something has been dead too long beneath the soil. Tom finally spoke, but it wasn't speech. Not really. His lips moved, his throat worked, but what came out was a low, rustling sound like wind moving through tall grass. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. Jenny grabbed her pack, her hands trembling. He won't be here by morning. What do you mean? I asked, though part of me already knew. She didn't answer. She just kept shoving things into her bag, avoiding Tom's eyes. The fire burned lower, shadows stretching long across the clearing. Tom didn't move again. He just sat, staring into the flames, moss spreading slowly across his boots. Every so often I thought I saw him twitch, like something was crawling beneath his skin. I couldn't sleep. None of us could. The night dragged, on heavy and suffocating, the forest too quiet. Somewhere out in the dark a branch snapped, but the sound didn't fade. It lingered, repeating faintly, like an echo that didn't belong. By dawn, Tom was gone. His bedroll lay empty, damp with morning dew. The moss where he'd sat had thickened overnight, spreading in a perfect circle, rich and glistening. His boots were there too, upright and filled with green. No tracks led away, no sign of struggle. Just absence. Marcus swore under his breath, pacing the edge of camp. Jenny stood with her arms wrapped tight around herself, eyes hard but glistening, with unshed tears. I walked to the boots, my throat dry. Up close I could see the moss curling upward, delicate tendrils creeping over the leather as though still hungry. A smell rose from them. Sweet, wet, decayed. That was when I realized the truth. The forest didn't take Tom violently. It absorbed him, slow and patient, like it had all the time in the world, and he had stepped exactly where it wanted him to. The silence after Tom vanished was worse than his presence. At least when he was sitting by the fire, silent and strange, we could still pretend he was one of us. After he was gone, there was only the knowledge that the rules weren't warnings. They were guarantees. I tried to focus on work the next day. That's what Marcus said we had to do. Keep cutting, keep clearing, keep moving forward. You think too much about the kid, you'll lose it. Forest'll eat you too. His words were sharp, but his hands shook as he tied back his gear. Jenny wouldn't even look at the moss ring left in camp. She moved around it like it was a sinkhole that might swallow her whole. By mid-afternoon, I was swinging my axe, hacking at a fallen branch, sweat running into my eyes, when I heard it, my name, clear as day, spoken in my own voice. It came from deeper in the trees beyond the cut line. I froze, the axe blade buried halfway into the wood. My mouth went dry. Again, my name, softer this time, but it was me, my voice. Did you hear that? I whispered. Jenny stiffened. Marcus shook his head quickly, too quickly. Don't listen, don't answer. The rules swam back into my head. Do not speak to voices after sundown. But it wasn't sundown. The light still filtered through the canopy, gold and green. Though the air already felt cooler, the voice came again, closer, exactly matched to my tone, like someone had recorded me and was playing it back. Only this time, it stretched the syllables, pulling them long and wet, like sap dripping from bark. My stomach twisted. I tightened my grip on the axe handle. Behind me, one of the rookies, Caleb, snorted nervously. That's just an echo. Sound bounces in woods like this. Jenny turned on him fast, her eyes flashing. Don't you dare answer it. But Caleb was pale, sweating, and trying to laugh at what scared him. He lifted 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled, a quick, sharp note that echoed cleanly through the trees. The forest held its breath. Then, whistle, not an echo, a reply. It came from far out in the dark of the pines. Then again, closer, then closer still. Each time it repeated, it bent, warped, like the sound had to travel through something wet and hollow. Shut up, Marcus hissed, shoving Caleb's shoulder. You goddamn fool! Another whistle. Just behind us this time. The hair on my arms lifted. I gripped my axe like a weapon. The air had gone still. Too still. As if even the wind was hiding. Jenny's saw slipped from her hands and hit the dirt. None of us bent to pick it up. The whistling circled us, darting from one side of the trail to the other, sometimes sounding high in the canopy, sometimes low to the ground. And then, chillingly, it stopped. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my chest burned. Caleb chuckled nervously again. See? It's nothing. Just noise. The fire back in camp blew out. We weren't near it. We'd left it burning when we set out. But we all saw the faint plume of smoke rising above the trees, too sudden to be natural. Back. Now, Marcus barked. We half ran, half stumbled down the trail, the tools on our belts clattering, hearts pounding. The camp felt wrong as soon as it came into view. The ring of stones where the fire had been was cold, blackened, ash scattered as if something had smothered it with a heavy hand. But no breeze moved, no air stirred. The smoke was still fresh. Jenny crouched, running her fingers over the ground. No footprints, no sign anyone came through. That was no echo, I whispered. No one argued. Night fell thick and fast, like the forest dragged the sun out of the sky too soon. We lit new torches, but the flames wavered, never steady, always threatening to go out. I kept expecting another whistle, another voice, but the forest was silent now, watching. When I lay down, every rustle in the trees sounded like my name. Every sigh of wind was the beginning of a word, and I couldn't stop thinking about the rules. How they weren't warnings, but traps laid bare, the only line between us and whatever waited past the tree line. But rules are only good if everyone follows them. And Caleb had broken one. The consequence just hadn't arrived yet. The ranger came back the next morning. No one saw him approach. One moment our camp was quiet, the forest still damp with the last of night's fog, and then he was there, leaning on his staff at the edge of the clearing, his hat pulled low, eyes shadowed. He hadn't made a sound on the trail. Not a snapped twig. Not a footstep. Marcus swore under his breath. Jenny looked like she wanted to spit. Caleb wouldn't even lift his eyes from the ground. The ranger didn't speak right away. He just studied us, his gaze moving from bedroll to fire pit to the tools stacked neatly at the edge of camp. When his eyes landed on the broken saw Jenny had dropped the day before, his jaw tightened. "You've been careless," he said at last. His voice was rough, like bark splitting in fire. No one argued. He walked forward, stooping slowly to pick up the saw. The handle was cracked clean through, the blade dulled, flecked with green where it had scraped moss. He didn't hand it back to Jenny. He didn't scold. Instead, he carried it to the fire pit, stacked tinder, and struck a match. The flames caught, quickly, too quickly, flaring higher than they should have. The ranger laid the saw across them, and the smell that rose was foul. Acrid smoke, metal biting the air, but beneath it, something worse. Something like burned hair and wet soil. Caleb gagged. I had to turn away. Jenny pressed her fist to her mouth but wouldn't move, wouldn't interrupt. The ranger muttered as he worked. Not English. Not any language I knew. Harsh syllables that scraped his throat raw, punctuated by sharp pauses like someone driving nails into wood. The words felt wrong in the air. Too heavy. Like they didn't belong in our world. When the saw twisted in the fire, the ranger's muttering stopped. He lifted his head and looked at us. "You think the rules are suggestions?" he asked softly. No one answered. He pointed his staff at Caleb. "You whistled." Caleb flinched. It was just, never just," the ranger snapped. His voice cracked like a whip, making Caleb shrink back. "You gave it a thread to follow. Do you understand? The forest hears you. It knows you now." Caleb shook his head violently. "No, I didn't mean, it doesn't matter what you mean," the ranger said. His tone softened again, but it wasn't comfort, it was pity. "It only matters what you do." He turned to Jenny. "You dropped your tool." Her chin lifted defiantly. "It broke. And did you burn it before dark?" His stare bored into her. Jenny's jaw worked, but she said nothing. The ranger's silence was worse than yelling. He bent to the fire again, feeding it more branches, more smoke. "You are alive today because it allowed you to be. Do not mistake mercy for forgetfulness," I wanted to ask. I wanted to demand the truth. What was it? What lived in the moss, in the echoes, in the silence of this forest. But when I opened my mouth, my voice caught in my throat. Some instinct kept me quiet, like even the question itself was dangerous. The ranger seemed to read the thought in my eyes anyway. He tapped his staff against the dirt, each strike measured. "This forest is older than you can understand," he said. "Older than names, older than memory. The rules are not mine. They were not the first rangers nor the first settlers. They are bargains written in blood and silence, carried down through every fool who thought they could tame this place." He leaned closer to the flames, his face lit orange. The lines on his skin looked carved, deep as scars. "You don't break bargains with things older than time," he whispered. "Not and stay whole." The saw collapsed in the fire, blackened and twisted. Sparks leapt up and died in the fog. Jenny finally spoke, her voice trembling despite her hard expression. "Why us? Why keep sending people out here if you know what it does?" The ranger looked at her for a long time, then at Marcus, then at me. His stare lingered on me a second too long, like he knew something I didn't. Then he straightened, staff tapping once more against the dirt. "Because the forest must be kept at bay," he said simply. "Cleared, cut, watched. If the trail's close, it spreads. And if it spreads, the bargains shift." "What does that mean?" I asked, the words scraping out before I could stop them. The ranger's eyes narrowed. "It means you don't want to find out." He stepped back, the fire still burning behind him. "Keep the rules, or it won't just be one of you gone next time. It'll be all of you. And more besides." Then he turned and walked into the EO. Trees. No one followed. No one dared. The smoke hung heavy over camp, bitter and choking. My clothes stank of it, clung to me like oil. But beneath the stench I could still smell the moss, sweet, damp, patient. Waiting. The ranger's warning hung over us like smoke long after he disappeared. We tried to settle back into routine, but the forest didn't let us. That night, I woke to a strange dampness. At first I thought my canteen had leaked in the bedroll, soaking through the fabric, but when I reached down, my fingers came away green. Sticky. Moss. Thin strands clung to my blanket, wet and alive, the color too bright to belong in the dull firelight. I scrambled back, kicking free of the bedroll. Jenny stirred and sat up, her hair falling across her face. "What is it?" she whispered. I pointed. The moss spread across the ground where I'd slept, tiny filaments pushing upward as if reaching for me even now. The smell rose sharp, sweet rot, damp cellar stone, earth after heavy rain. Jenny cursed under her breath. She grabbed the torch beside her bedroll and jammed it toward the growth. The flames licked across the fuzz, curling it black, filling the air with the stench of burning vegetation. The fire sputtered. The moss resisted, shrinking from the torch, but not before leaving scorch marks on the ground that glowed faintly as if alive. I couldn't breathe. It had been under me, touching me. Marcus stumbled out of his tent at the sound, axe in hand, eyes wild. Caleb followed, bleary and pale. Both froze when they saw the smoldering patch at the center of camp. "It's here now," Jenny said flatly. "It's not waiting in the trail anymore." She sounded resigned, like she'd expected this moment, like she'd been counting the days. Marcus swore, pacing tight circles. "It's because of the kid. Because of the whistle. Because of it." "Doesn't matter why," Jenny snapped. She held the torch steady, but I saw her hand shaking. "It's here. That means it's done with warnings." Silence fell again. The fire crackled weakly, but it didn't warm. My skin felt clammy, my chest tight, like the moss was already inside my lungs. Jenny sat down heavily on a log, the torch guttering beside her. She pulled her pant leg up past the knee, and I swear I stopped breathing. Her calf was a map of scars, long, jagged, and discolored. Some white and puckered like old burns, others greenish at the edges as if they had never fully healed. The skin looked fragile, almost translucent. "This wasn't my first season," she said, her voice low. 2 years ago, I broke a rule, Stepped where I shouldn't have. The moss took hold. The ranger, he cut it out with fire. She met my eyes, unblinking. It never really leaves. You burn it back, but it waits. Always waits. The torchlight made the scars shine. Caleb gagged and turned away. Marcus swore again, softer this time, not angry, but afraid. You should have told us, I whispered. Jenny laughed bitterly. Would you have stayed if I had? Her words hung heavy. I wanted to argue, but she was right. I would have run. Hell, I wanted to run now. But where? Every trail led deeper into the forest. Every step risked another rule broken. The night dragged. We sat in a tight circle around the embers, flinching at every rustle in the brush. The moss patch smoldered, blackened in places, but in others it glowed faintly green, like embers that weren't dying but biding time. When dawn finally came, the fog was thicker than ever. The trail seemed narrower, the trees closer, their branches leaning in as though listening, and when I looked toward the tree line I saw it, fresh moss. Not scattered randomly, but shaped, a perfect ring just like the one Tom had left behind. Only this one circled our entire camp. The forest had drawn a boundary. We were inside now. The morning after Caleb was claimed, the forest felt different. Before, it had been hostile in ways we could almost predict. Moss that spread when stepped on, echoes that spoke when answered, tools that turned against us if we didn't destroy them. But that day the air itself seemed to breathe with intent, not wild, not random, purposeful. Marcus tried to keep us moving. Stay sharp. Keep the line clear. Don't think about it. He swung his axe with a violence that looked more like desperation than work. Chips of wood flew, but his rhythm was ragged. His eyes kept cutting to the trees, expecting them to move. I couldn't stop thinking about Caleb's face, the way his body twisted into something unrecognizable, nailed to the tree like an offering. Jenny stayed quiet, but I noticed her scanning the moss more than before, studying it like she was trying to see patterns. Around midday, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The moss wasn't where it had been the day before. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A patch that should have been 5 feet off the trail edge was now right against my boot. Another one further ahead had shifted shape overnight, its edges curving like fingers stretching toward us. When I bent down to look closer, I swore I saw it quiver, not sway from wind, quiver like flesh under a knife. I staggered back, bile burning my throat. That's when the voice came. Not my name this time. Not anyone's name, just words, clear, crisp in Jenny's voice. Help me, please, help me. We all froze. Jenny's axe slipped from her hands, crashing into the dirt. She stared wide-eyed into the trees. The voice came again. Identical. Help me, please, help me. Jenny shook her head violently. That's not me. The forest repeated her denial. This time the words came from 3 directions at once, left, right, and deep ahead. The same pitch, the same tremble. Perfect copies. Marcus cursed, clapping his hands over his ears. Don't answer, don't. But the forest didn't need us to answer. It spoke anyway. This time it was Marcus's voice. Over here, I need help. Then mine. Wait for me. Hearing myself echo from the dark froze my blood. My throat locked, but tears stung my eyes. The forest wasn't mimicking anymore, it was choosing. Picking what to say, who to imitate, how to twist our own sounds against us. Jenny stumbled backward until her heel caught on a root, and she fell. Her hands clawed at the dirt, nails tearing, eyes wild. It's learning, she whispered. God, it's learning. We forced her back to camp before sundown, but the forest didn't stop. That night, tools broke one after another, not from accidents, from intention. Saw handles splintered as if something pressed from the inside. Axe heads snapped free mid-swing. Even Marcus's knife, kept sharp and oiled, cracked down the middle as he tried to cut tinder. Every break came with that same damp smell. The moss's smell. Marcus tried to pile the broken pieces into the fire, but the flames struggled, flickering as if smothered by an invisible hand. The smoke stung my lungs, thick and acrid. It's not just waiting for us to make mistakes anymore, I whispered. It's making them happen. Jenny looked at me with hollow eyes. The rules were never protection. They were boundaries. But now, she trailed off, her voice breaking. Now it knows the boundaries. The forest stayed quiet after that. Too quiet. Not even the usual rustle of nocturnal animals. Just silence. Thick as the damp fog that never seemed to lift anymore. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard myself calling from the trees, my voice warped, begging, accusing. By dawn, I realized something that chilled me deeper than anything yet. The rules had been clear. Don't step on fresh moss, don't answer voices, don't whistle back, burn broken tools, but now the forest was rewriting the game. Fresh moss appeared wherever we walked, whether we avoided it or not. Voices spoke whether we answered or not. Tools shattered whether we mishandled them or not. The rules hadn't been broken this time. The rules had been outgrown, and that meant whatever we'd been warned about before, the punishments we'd seen, were only the beginning. I should have seen it coming. Jenny had been unraveling since Caleb was taken, her eyes darting into the trees like she expected the forest to call her name any second. She whispered to herself at night, sometimes loud enough that I caught fragments. Apologies, bargains, prayers. I thought it was just fear. I didn't think she'd act on it. The morning it happened, the fog lay thick around camp, thicker than I'd ever seen. The air was wet, clinging, heavy with the smell of earth and decay. I woke with moss stuck to my sleeve like it had crept into my bedroll during the night. Marcus was already up, pacing, muttering curses as he tried to relash. The supplies that had been scattered across the ground. The fire pit had gone cold, stones damp and blackened, as if something had smothered the flames in the dark. Jenny sat apart, sharpening her axe with quick, jerking strokes. Her hands shook, but her face was strangely calm, almost serene. When I asked if she was all right, she looked at me with eyes so hollow I barely recognized her. "It won't stop," she whispered. "You feel it too. It knows us now. It wants more." Marcus slammed his fist against a log. "Shut up, Jenny. We keep to the rules. That's all there is." But even as he said it, we both knew the rules didn't hold anymore. The forest had changed the terms. By midday, we were back on the trail, hacking at brush that seemed to grow faster than we could cut. My arms ached, sweat stung my eyes, and every breath tasted of damp rot. The moss was everywhere now, patches, spreading across trees, dripping down rocks like green veins. It was closing in, slow but deliberate. That's when Jenny disappeared. One moment she was a few steps behind Marcus, dragging branches into a pile. The next, silence. No footsteps, no breath, nothing. Just gone. We shouted her name, but the fog swallowed our voices, dampened them like the forest was absorbing the sound. My throat went raw from calling. Marcus cursed, swinging his axe at a tree until chips flew, but there was no trace of her. When she came back, it was almost worse. She walked out of the fog an hour later, calm, clean, not even winded. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Where the hell were you?" Marcus snapped, relief quickly turning to fury. Jenny tilted her head. "Talking." "Talking to who?" I asked, my chest tight. She didn't answer. She just set her axe down, leaned on the handle, and stared at us both like she was measuring something. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fire burned low, spitting sparks, but Jenny didn't even pretend to rest. She just sat, there, eyes on the trees, whispering under her breath. The words were too low to catch, but every so often I heard fragments. Safe, promise, I give. By the time the screams came, I knew. It was Thomas, the youngest of us, barely 20, eager to prove himself. He'd been on watch, standing at the edge of camp with a lantern. One moment I saw his silhouette swaying in the fog. The next, Jenny was beside him, her hand on his shoulder, guiding him forward. "Jenny!" I shouted, scrambling up, but it was too late. Thomas stepped straight into a patch of moss that hadn't been there seconds before. The moment his boot sank into the green, the ground pulsed. The moss surged upward, swallowing his legs, wrapping, like hundreds of damp hands. He screamed, thrashing, but Jenny just stood there staring down at him with tears streaming silently down her face. We rushed forward, Marcus swinging his axe wildly, but the moss was faster. It spread over Thomas's chest into his mouth, muffling his screams until they were nothing but choked gurgles. His eyes rolled back, his body jerking as the moss forced itself down his throat. Then he was gone. Not even a body left, just the faint outline of a man imprinted in green, the moss glistening wet in the firelight. Jenny collapsed to her knees, sobbing. I thought it would spare me. I gave it what it wanted. Marcus grabbed her by the collar, shaking her so hard her teeth clacked. You fed him to it. You fed him. She didn't fight back. She just let herself be shaken, her face slack, tears running unchecked. It promised me. But it lied. It always lies. The forest wasn't done. As we argued, the moss spread further, tendrils reaching outward like it wanted more. The ground quivered beneath us, damp and alive, pulsing faintly in time with our heartbeats. I pulled Marcus back, dragging him toward the fire. Jenny stayed on her knees, hands clutching at the dirt. The moss curled up her arms, creeping into her sleeves, wrapping her wrists. She didn't resist. Her voice was barely audible over the crackle of the flames. I thought it would keep me safe. Then the moss covered her face. Her body convulsed once, twice before it folded into the green. In seconds, she was gone. Not consumed like Thomas, not erased completely. Something worse. Her shape remained. Her outline pressed into the moss like she'd been absorbed into it, part of the forest now. The smell was unbearable, sweet and rotten, like flowers blooming in decay. Marcus gagged, retching into the dirt. I couldn't move. The moss pulsed again, and in Jenny's voice it whispered, safe, safe, safe. We didn't sleep that night. We couldn't. Every time the wind shifted, the forest repeated her words, mocking us in her tone, soft and pleading. Safe, safe, safe. But there was nothing safe left. By dawn, Marcus and I were the only ones left. The camp was too quiet, stripped of voices and motion. Every empty bedroll a wound I couldn't look at without feeling the weight of absence. The fire had burned down to gray ash, cold in the morning air. Jenny's last words still echoed in my head, though I knew it wasn't her anymore. Just the forest wearing her voice like a mask. We didn't talk. Words felt dangerous now, like anything spoken could be stolen, twisted, turned against us. Marcus packed silently, his movements harsh and mechanical. I followed, too numb to argue, too afraid to linger. We had no plan except to move, keep to the trail, keep walking, pretend we still had some control. The deeper we went, the more the forest showed its true face. Moss blanketed everything, not in patches anymore, but in sheets, spreading across tree trunks, dripping from branches, carpeting the ground in thick, spongy layers. It pulsed faintly when we touched it, a heartbeat we didn't want to feel. The smell was suffocating. Damp rot, iron, and something sweet beneath it like overripe fruit. Marcus hacked at it with his axe, but the blade sank in as though cutting through wet flesh. Thick, dark fluid seeped out, not sap, not water. Something heavier. It dripped onto the ground with a sluggish sound, staining the dirt black. The moss bled. We froze, staring at the wound. The forest groaned around us, low and guttural, like the earth itself had felt pain. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches arching overhead until the sky was nothing but a thin line of gray. Marcus swore under his breath. It's alive. The fire. Words sat heavy between us, not just alive, aware, and awake. The moss writhed where he'd cut it, tendrils twitching and curling like severed nerves. Then before our eyes, the wound began to knit itself back together. The black fluid was drawn inward, threads of green weaving over the gash until it looked unbroken, whole again. I thought of Caleb, of Thomas, of Jenny. I thought of the rules. Don't Step on fresh moss, don't answer voices, don't whistle back, burn broken tools, and realized they'd never been protection at all. They'd been containment, rituals to keep this thing asleep, and now we'd woken it. We reached a clearing that afternoon, a place where the trail widened and split. At the center lay a massive swell of moss, a mound the size of a cabin, glistening wet and throbbing faintly. It wasn't just growing on the ground. It was the ground, heaving up in waves like the back of some buried creature breathing beneath the earth. Marcus stared at it, jaw tight, eyes wild. This is it. This is the heart. He started piling, brush around the mound, branches, leaves, anything dry enough to burn. His movements were frantic, his face set in grim determination. "Help me," he barked. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I moved anyway. Gathering what I could, my hands shaking so badly I kept dropping sticks. The mound pulsed faster as we worked, as if it knew what we were doing. A low hum filled the clearing, vibrating in my chest, a sound too deep to be natural. When Marcus struck a match, the flame looked weak, trembling like it didn't want to exist here. He cupped it in his hands, muttering a prayer, and lowered it into the pile. The fire caught, slow at first, then roaring as the brush ignited. Heat blasted against my face, smoke clawing at my throat. The moss screamed. It wasn't a sound I can describe in human terms. It was every creak of every tree, every groan of every root, magnified into a wail that shook the ground. Birds burst from the canopy, shrieking. The trees themselves seemed to convulse, branches thrashing as if in agony. Marcus fed the flames, his face lit orange, sweat pouring down his brow. "Burn, damn you, burn!" But the fire didn't spread the way it should have. The flames licked the moss, blackening its surface, yet the green knit back together faster than the fire could eat it. Smoke thickened, acrid and oily, burning my lungs, stinging my eyes. Then the fire sputtered. One moment it raged, the next it died down to weak embers, smothered by a sudden rush of damp air. The moss steamed, hissing, and the mound pulsed harder, stronger, faster. Marcus fell to his knees, coughing violently, his axe slipping from his hands. The clearing shook as roots tore free from the soil, thick and writhing, slamming into the ground around us. A voice rolled through the forest, not human, not animal, but something vast. It didn't speak in words I could understand, but I felt them inside me, heavy as stone, cold as water. A warning, a claim. The mound split open. From its center rose a column of writhing green moss and roots twisting together into a shape too fluid to be real. Tendrils lashed outward, snapping through the air, each tipped with spore clouds that burned my skin when they touched. Marcus grabbed his axe, his face contorted in rage. "You won't take me!" he roared, swinging wildly, hacking at the tendrils. For every one he cut, two more sprouted. The air reeked of blood and rot, the metallic tang of the moss's fluid mixing with the smoke of dying fire. My head spun, my chest heaved, and still the forest screamed around us. I don't remember how we made it out of the clearing. The last thing I saw was Marcus standing against the mound, swinging his axe until tendrils wrapped around him, dragging him upward. His face was lit in firelight, teeth bared in defiance before the moss closed over him completely. I ran. The ground shifted beneath my feet, trails collapsing, trees twisting out of place to block my path. The forest had woken, fully and completely, and it was not going to let us leave. Behind me, the mound pulsed like a beating heart, louder and louder until it filled my ears with nothing but rhythm. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. The forest's heartbeat. I made it out of the forest. At least that's what I keep telling myself. The air was different when the trees finally thinned, sharper, colder, carrying the clean bite of mountain wind instead of the heavy damp rot I'd breathed for weeks. The sky opened above me, pale and gray, clouds stretched like thin scars. For the first time in days, I saw the horizon. I collapsed on the gravel road leading back toward town, the same road where I'd first arrived, desperate for work, stupid enough to take it. My knees scraped open, blood soaking into the dust. I didn't care. I lay there panting, staring at the sky like I'd forgotten what it looked like. Cars don't come this far. The town barely has people, let alone traffic. Hours passed before. An old truck rattled down the road and the driver, an old woman with skin like paper, helped me into the passenger seat. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Her eyes flicked to my hands, my arms, my face. She saw the green. I tried to cover it, but it was too late. My skin had changed. Thin threads of moss curled beneath the surface, faint but undeniable, like veins dyed the wrong color. Every time my heart beat, I felt the moss pulse in rhythm, sinking with me or maybe forcing me to sink with it. The woman drove me into town, her silence heavier than any words. When she dropped me at the ranger station, she wouldn't meet my eyes. The station was empty. The old ranger was gone. The logbook sat on the desk, the rules written in his shaky hand, stained with ash and dirt. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, and read them again. Never step where the moss is fresh. Never speak to voices after sundown. Never whistle back to echoes. Burn broken tools immediately, the words blurred, not because I was crying, though I was, but because the letters seemed to shift on the page, curling, greening, sprouting faint shoots of moss between the lines. I dropped the book. That night, in the motel room above the diner, I peeled off my shirt and stared at myself in the mirror. At first, I almost believed I was still human. My reflection was pale, gaunt, eyes sunken from exhaustion. My ribs stood out like ridges, my skin stretched too tight. But when I leaned closer, I saw it. The faint shimmer beneath the flesh, a flicker that wasn't mine. For a second, bark spread across my cheekbone. For a second, my pupils weren't round anymore, but ringed in green. Then it was gone, and only my face stared back. I pressed a hand to the mirror. My skin was cold, my pulse sluggish. Inside, something shifted. It started small, a prickle beneath the skin, like splinters working upward from bone. Sometimes I smell damp earth even when I'm indoors. Sometimes I hear whispers that sound like my own voice. The rules still matter. I know that now. Not out there. In here. If I step on fresh moss, I feel it under my skin, writhing. If I speak after sundown, something answers from inside my chest. If I whistle, echoes rattle in my teeth. And when something breaks in my hands, I feel the urge to burn it, because if I don't, the moss feeds on the fragments. I am the camp, now. The trail. The forest. The old ranger failed. I see that clearly. He tried to hold it back, tried to burn and bind and contain. He lived with the rules carved into his life, and when he faltered, the forest punished him. Now it's my turn. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel roots spreading from my spine, burrowing into the mattress, the floor, the earth. I wake up with dirt beneath my fingernails, damp stains on the sheets, moss blooming between the cracks in the floorboards. I don't know how long I'll last. I don't know if there's a way out. But I do know this. The forest doesn't let go. It doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It only waits. And when people wander too far into the mountains, when they take jobs no one else wants, when they think they're just clearing trails, it'll be me they meet now. I still have the rules, but the rules are inside me.